Well, welcome everyone to our final session of the conference. We are moving all of the ideas and insights gathered over the last 2 days into action in a virtual world, in this virtual world that we are all now in. So very excited to be here with all of you on our final day of the conference. It's been extremely inspiring, learned so much, and really gathered a lot of interesting ideas and insights from all of the presenters and all of you. This really truly was a virtual skills exchange. So thank you all for being open to sharing your insights, what you have learned along the way here as well. I'm very excited to be joined by my two co-presenters and action planning extraordinaires. We're going to have a lot of fun with our presenters today as well. But I'm joined by Sue Collier, who is the Chief Engagement Officer for Patient-Centered Innovation. Sue is going to walk us through a really interactive action planning session. This is meant to be a very interactive session, so please act accordingly. Go in the chat, share your ideas, be a part of this action planning session with us. And we also have Tara Bristol Rouse, who is the principal at Partnership Health Advisors. Tara is our technology extraordinaire today and is going to be guiding us through that action plan as well. So we will get to our presenters in just a moment, but I want to quickly review all of the ideas and insights that you have gathered over the last 2 days. So first, I'd just like to have everyone take a minute, and in the chat box, I know there were many breakout sessions to be a part of, but I would like all of you to pick out one, that biggest idea, biggest insight that you gathered over the last 2 days, and share that in the chat box. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we're going to do a quick poll. All right. Ellie, the No One Dies Alone, I believe that was the acronym there. Here we go. Health literacy, brave space, ensure there is space, patient education tools. Awesome. Keep those ideas coming. I know it can be hard to pick one out of everything that we talked about over the last 2 days, but it looks like health literacy, health equity, brave space, NODA is all standing out. We'll keep those coming. In the meantime, we're going to do a really quick poll. So we have gathered some of those ideas and insights that you're chatting in and that you have been chatting in over the last 2 days and gathered them into a poll. So we want to hear from all of you, knowing all of those ideas and insights. What would you like to bring to life in your current organization or your current work? So we have a few options here. First, ensure there is space to build a table with historically underrepresented patients and families, connect with leadership to develop strategies to engage patients and families in quality improvement, ask patient upon admission if there is anything the staff needs to know about them to make them more comfortable, create patient education tools with patients, begin meeting virtually with our patient family advisory councils, engage patients and families in end-of-life care at our organization, or use a PDSA to determine root cause of gaps in quality care. So we'll leave that open for another minute or so. I see lots of responses coming in. So when we have the majority of participants, we will close the poll in just a minute. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, so it's slowed down a little bit, so I'm going to end polling. And share the results. So I definitely thought that this would be the case, that ensuring space to build a table with historically underrepresented patients and families would definitely be the top. And that's really exciting to see. Our conversation yesterday with Ayadola and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workgroup members is only the beginning of our ongoing conversation. So we look forward to engaging all of you in those ongoing conversations as we build this table for health equity and improved health outcomes for our Black and African American community. So very excited to continue with that conversation. But we also have a few other highlights: connecting with leadership, asking the patient upon admission if there's anything staff needs to know about them, engaging patients and families in end-of-life care. I saw that in the chat as well. Thank you all for participating in that quick poll. I'm going to stop sharing. And I think next I am going to pass it now off to Sue and Tara to now walk us through a action planning. And like we said, this is going to be very interactive. So participate with us, share your ideas on how we can create an action plan together.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
Well, happy Tuesday. And let me just say, I'm going to get into the headspace that we are all together. We are in the same conference room. It looks like there's at least 90 people that are on the call today. So I'm going to go ahead and mentally picture that we are sitting in the room together, and we are all in a point in time at this conference where we've been sitting through hours of virtual learning, but we're all still thinking big. We're out there. We're in outer space. We are in this frame of thinking about how are we going to take all these big ideas that we've heard back to our organization. So this session is really designed to create a bridge to get you from this conference to back to your organization, and to really spend some time thinking about, how do I mine, M-I-N-E, how do I really garden and mine the ideas that I've heard? So in order to help you do that, one of the best practices is that you create your action plan when the idea is fresh in your head. But we're going to make you get in the weeds. We're going to give you some tools to really get down into some details and to really think about, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to take it from idea to action? And then we're going to do this even though we're not in the room together. So Lindsay, if you'll turn to the next slide. For those of you that logged on to this particular session ahead of time, I think it's important for you to go ahead, if you have time, to either print out a copy of this particular Canvas, or at least follow along with us right now. We're going to use this Canvas to help you take an idea that you really are interested in. It looks like the idea that had the greatest interest was the idea that dealt with, how do we expand representation on our patient and family engagement initiatives, whether it's a PFAC or quality improvement projects, or maybe having patients and caregivers and family members actively involved in other initiatives in your organization. How do we get that, that group to really represent those that are underrepresented, or to expand diversity? So we're going to jump off with that idea. And as Lindsay said just a few minutes ago, this is an interactive session. So get out your natural herbs so that you can get refreshed and excited, because we want to see the chat box blow up. And I wish I had a background that blew up right now, so get that kind of sense and excitement. Let's take the tool, and we're going to do something that we want to be very transparent with, and to show you that we are also learning how to adapt. And since we're not in a room together, we're going to show you how we would be creating this tool as we go. Maybe we would do it on a screen in front of a room, and we would actually fill in the blanks in this Canvas. But we created this canvas just for you to take back to your organization. But for right now, for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to ask you to actually create your tool today, create your action plan using this very simple canvas. And we're going to show you how to do that right now. So if the idea is that you want to expand diversity to increase representation of individuals that are really being served by your organization, but they're not showing up, their faces are not at the table, their voices are not in the room, then be very specific. What do you want to do? Let's think about how to make that a very concrete idea. And this is the interactive part. We're going to show you some ideas we have, but please put your ideas. How would you make that a very specific, I want to what? So let's say if you want to expand diversity and increase representation, does that mean that you want to have a 20% greater diversity in your PFAC? Or do you want to have at least 5 other PFAs that represent patients that are served by your organization that currently are not at the table? Be very specific about what you think that should look like. Chat in the chat box. What do you think would be a very specific fill in the blank, I want to X? It's also very important in action planning that you know why you're doing this. Why are you looking to have greater representation? We've heard some wonderful examples in some of the earlier sessions about the value of having diversity because of the impact that it has on the strategies and the approaches that your organization may take, whether it's to address education in the community or to make changes in practices or policies. So be very clear about your why. Let's say that our why might be because we believe that all voices matter and that the voices of the individuals that are not represented, which may very well be frequently people of color, it's critical that we have their voices and their participation. So I see Charlene said, I would like to increase inclusivity by 5% initially and then by 5% each year. Excellent. That is a really great example, Charlene, of how you want to be very specific. Jacqueline says a more diverse group would have more diverse experiences and comprehensive feedback. That's a really good why. So fill out your form as you're seeing us do that. And the message here is that before you start translating an idea into action, be really clear with yourself. What is it that you're doing and why are you doing it? That's going to help you not only move to the next stage, but also be really clear if you get stuck at any point in developing your action plan, come back to your what you want to do, your aim, and why you want to do it. And make sure that you're being true to that. I see Teresa says that she wants to gather a more socioeconomic diverse population representative of your high disparity areas by 10%. Excellent. That's a great example. And I see lots of other ideas coming in: expand diversity of homeless, young adults, create and reassign staff in the hospital to develop community relationships. Excellent. These are wonderful, wonderful ideas. So as you're thinking about what you want to do, what your aim is, and why you want to do it, already in your head, I'm seeing even in your responses in the chat box, you're starting to think about some of the partners that you would work with. So let's think about it. Maybe you would contact, if you want to increase the diversity of homeless, they're involved in providing input and perspectives, contact the local homeless shelters and ask if there are individuals either on the team of staff that can identify representatives that are served by that organization. Maybe you also want to include, if you have an equity officer or if you have a community-based organization that your hospital utilizes heavily in post-discharge support services. Maybe it's a public health department, maybe it is a local physician practice that you want to involve in this work to really get their voices, to get ideas of who they might bring to the table. And I'm looking at some of the other comments in the chat box. Please continue to add your input. Who else would you listen to? Who else would you ask to be involved in this conversation? It says, I see here that we don't want just the educated, privileged populations, and that we want to be sure that we are better serving the needs at a micro and macro level. So think about it. Who are your partners? Maybe one way to even go at this particular segment of your action plan is to write down everybody that is, and I hate to use this word, the usual suspects, the folks that pretty much typically always get asked to participate, and then ask the question, now who's missing? And this would be a really good way for you to get creative and to think about how else might we involve other individuals. I heard a recommendation in one of the other sessions that the coffee lady or the coffee guy, or even individuals who are working in the housekeeping, environmental services, or dietary, these may very well be individuals that represent underrepresented areas in your community. And those would be individuals that you could go to and say, we want to get more representation and engagement, and particularly in people of color. How can we do that? Would you be interested? What are ways that we can bring those perspectives to the table? So asking who's typically engaged and then asking who's missing is one way. I see Janice says, talk to leaders to gather information about underserved populations. Big brothers, big sisters, that is an excellent suggestion. I love that particular idea. Having the LGBTQ community, their representatives that you could contact to say, we're not hearing from their voices, what can we do to engage them more actively in the work? So what you're doing in this phase is you've been really clear on what you want to do, your aim. You've already laid out what are some of the reasons why you're doing this. And again, think authentically. Make sure that your reasons for doing this is meaningful. And then start to lay out who would be the folks that are going to help you kind of champion your ideas. By this point, you're probably already going, and I'm seeing some of this in the chat box, you're already thinking, what do I do first? What might be one of the first things that I do? So here's something that may be an easy start, but it is one that is still very challenging for hospitals and health systems and other health system related organizations. It's looking at your demographics. Maybe the first thing you need to do is to say, who are we serving? Let's do a breakdown. Find out who are the groups that are coming to our facilities that we are reaching out to, or that may, we believe, not be getting access to our services. That's a great place to start. Then you begin to isolate kind of data, some information that'll help you identify who is it that we need to make sure we've got a seat at the table. Or if we throw the table out, who are we going after out into the community to find and to engage? That's a good place to start. What is another first place to start? So I see, Lindsay, you said check your community health needs assessment. Excellent. Every hospital, every health system should now have a community health needs assessment. So that would be, for lack of a better way to say it, a little bit of an easy ask, an easy win. Hopefully, your community needs assessment has a very broad-reaching scan in terms of not only how they determined what those needs were, but who they asked for those, what those needs would be. So think about that second step might be, maybe we want to be sure that once we have the demographics, we've brought in other individuals to look at that and say, why are we not using the individuals in these demographics as a part of our patient-family engagement work? In other words, the second step might be some discovery, going out to leaders across your system, across the community, and just engaging them in conversation. I see that Riza, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, you want to ensure equity in our community engagement because we need to hear their voices more so than others who tend to be louder. Interesting. So you said neighborhood associations or organizations. This might be one of the groups in one of your initial steps that you go to and say, we're having difficulty. Here are the folks we're serving. Here's some gaps in the groups we're not getting to. What are some things that you think we should do? So your steps are not always what you plan by yourself. Maybe your steps are really about going out, discovering, collecting information, and learning from others. So think about that with your action plan. This is not about you creating an action plan all by yourself. This is really about setting up an opportunity to co-design and think about how in your initial steps, you are practicing their commitment to that voices matter, and particularly the voices of individuals that have not been represented or have not been engaged in the past. So you've gotten your data, your demographic information, you're starting to engage leaders to give feedback. What are some next steps that you could take? So I'm seeing some comments in the chat box. Remember to utilize local media for posting notices. Excellent. So you are thinking about other ways that you can learn from, discover, identify who may not be heard or may not be engaged. You're asking service organizations to do a presentation. Excellent. Actually, that was going to be one of my next recommendations for a step is you might be ready at this point to do a little pitch because you've gotten champions identified or some partners identified. You've looked at some data. You're starting to ask questions. You're gathering more perspective. Now you might want to do what I call a mini pitch. And that mini pitch would be to go out and to pull together individuals that would be, you think, kind of well on board, who would be in favor and support this goal, this aim to expand diversity, and also maybe some individuals that you think might be a little challenging, but keep it small. This would be another step that you could take to kind of test out your ideas, to test out your plan. What are some other steps that you think might be appropriate? I see that there's some comments that said, this is a good actionable example of implementing a process. Thanks for the real-time walkthrough. I want to hear from you on the chat box. What else are you thinking at this point you might see as a key step or date? So let's say it would take you about 2 weeks maybe to gather data. Hopefully your community health needs assessment is already available. Maybe somebody could easily run the demographics in your system. I'd love to hear in the chat box whether or not you think it would be easy to get demographic data in your organization. Many of you probably worked with the CMS HIN projects, and you know that one of the priorities was to reinforce the collection of demographic information. And what we saw was that really wasn't always that readily available or much less readily used. What else are you thinking? So here we are, we've got a series of steps that are kind of building on each other. Maybe your next step is after you've done your mini pitch and you've got some ideas of how to refine your next steps. This might be the time where you start to put together a small test of change. Maybe you go to your existing PFAC, or you go to a quality and safety team and you say, we'd like to have some individuals who we've not heard from participate, or we want to go out into the community and bring in these perspectives and these ideas from others. Can you help us do that? And so your next step may be to go ahead and put in place a small test of change. One thing that you're going to see as you are going through this really simple process, and we chose progress over perfection and paper over perfection in this example. So we wanted to give you something really simple. I'll admit that I hand drew this. It was intentional not to look professional. It was just intended to say, let's get something on paper while it's still fresh in your head. But if you're thinking about this, you're looking at these steps. What other information might you need in addition to demographic information? Chat in the chat box. Tell us what might be some examples of other data that would be helpful for you to have when you either go out to do a mini pitch or as you begin to engage other leaders. What are some examples? So let's take a minute. I'd love to see at least 5 or 6 chats coming out. Tell me some ideas of what you would see as some other sources of information. Let me throw one out. Tara, I don't know if you've got one right off the bat, but I see Lisa, you're saying the data team can help you understand how to request data if you bring them into the process. Excellent suggestion. So maybe the additional information you need is who's on board in your data team? Who's somebody that can not only be your partner and go alongside you in this work, but also can make sure that as you go throughout the process, you're creating metrics so you can measure and evaluate. Janice, you said relationships among community organizations. It'd be helpful to know maybe who you already have relationships with. Maybe this is, and I err on the side of being probably transparent to a fault. So I think it's important to know where there may be challenging relationships, where there may have not been success in connecting the healthcare system with the community. So you may need to know where some of the challenges have been, some of the barriers have been. I see, Lindsay, you said diversity or cultural competency information training, great. And also patient satisfaction surveys. Obviously, that would be important information, especially as you start to think about how am I going to measure impact? That would, and then Lucilla, you said how diverse is the leadership of the institution where the change is aimed? Excellent. That would be really good information to have. And it would be good information to have prior to going into creating that small test of change, because maybe one of your results is that you see a shift, not just in percentage of underrepresented voices involved in work, involved in PFACs, involved in quality and safety projects. Maybe one of the results is increased awareness of how substantial the gaps are. In other words, it may be that in the beginning phase of your action plan, you just want folks to understand this. We talk about diversity, we talk about bringing in lots of different ideas and perspectives, yet we don't have the table or the space at the table, much less the ability to create that space for some what can be very uncomfortable conversations for some. So I see Acacia, I hope I pronounced your name right. Family of patient input, great, excellent. So going to family members. What does the patient panel, consumer panel look like? Excellent. So just starting with whether you have a PFAC or a group of PFAs that are engaged, what does it look like now? What's the breakdown? I don't know how many of you have ever served on a board, and on a lot of boards, they do a breakdown when they're going after recruiting new board members, and they're like, what percentage are male, what percentage are female, what percentage are under 30, what percentage are over 60. I'm generally in that list, just FYI. Which ones are in finance, which ones are in healthcare, which ones might be involved in marketing. One of the things that I think is very important is that we start to look at even the way that we break out our characteristics, and we think, have we included individuals that we serve in a unique way, not only in terms of racial, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of, as Jacqueline said, statistics of the population served. Look beyond maybe those traditional breakouts of demographics. Tara, I may not have paused long enough to give you a chance. Did you have other ideas about additional information or even results as we're talking about that?
I had to get muted because my dog was snoring in the background, Sue. But, you know, I think, you know, the what additional information I need is one of those things that evolves as you go through the process, that this almost becomes, and hopefully people could get a little bit of a flavor for this as you and I are kind of, you're facilitating and I'm trying to get things down on paper, but this is really kind of a living tool. And so I think what you'll find, what folks would find as they go through these different steps, and, you know, even if you do this, you go, this shouldn't be our step 2, this should really be step 3, and this needs to move down. And so I think with all of these things, it does become this living, breathing document. And so, so many questions will likely come up. And so then it becomes part of, as you put this plan together, well, who's going to do this by when, and really becoming concrete with all of it. And so I love the ideas that are coming through on the chat box for the results. You know, I think some of this, especially if it's new work for folks out there, they may not have necessarily concrete ideas of what they want their results to be. And that may be something where you start with a dashboard that looks at, you know, what advisors do I have? You know, what's the demographic makeup? How does that compare with what our population we serve is? And then as you go, you're looking at maybe things more like increasing diversity, because we're also going to look at our HR practices. And so all of a sudden you're looking at what is the makeup of the candidates we're getting coming into our hospital, and then of those who apply, how many get interviews. And so you can see too where the results as you grow in this work and continue through key steps, that those will expand too.
Excellent points. And I think it's very important as you're starting to fill this out, or frankly, this is just one of thousands of tools or resources. You may want to, in your initial steps, find out what is your organization using in order to track performance improvement. The whole idea is that you're taking ideas from this conference and you're putting it into at least a conceptual action plan before you leave today. So think about other results. Maybe one of the results in your organization, aside from awareness, is that you want to make sure you have identified strong leaders or champions who you can continue to work with as you, as a patient experience or engagement leader, are driving change in your organization. So it may be that this is a personal result that you want to see, because you know that that's a part of those steps for excellence, is to have leadership engagement, having some awareness of who are your diversity leaders. And they may not be someone, it may not be someone who has the title. It may be others in your organization that can guide and lead change. So I'm going to wrap up fairly quickly. So we want to end with giving you some very concrete tips and tricks. So I'd like for everyone on the chat, right now it looks like we have 80 some folks on the call right now, almost 90. I want you to put one to-do on your list. If this were your aim and this was your focus, and it looked like the majority of you said in the poll that you wanted to expand diversity, increase representation in your organization, one to-do that you will achieve in the next week. So let's think about it. So maybe a to-do is that I'm going to fill out this form and I'm going to share it with someone else in the organization I think will help me manage this moving forward. Or maybe the to-do is that I want to seek out some of the additional information that I need within the next week. I'll send 2 emails to 2 people to get some of the information. Or maybe I'm going to approach someone on the leadership team to find out whether or not I'm positioned to really seek some of the partners that I've listed. Put in the chat box. So Jacqueline, you're going to talk with your supervisor about what you learned and your ideas for improvement. Great. You're going to, Ellie, you said you're going to engage our data team to provide the demographics. Wonderful. I see Katie says you're going to discuss this with the PFAC tonight. Great. Anything that says within the next 24 hours gets extra stars and points. And then it also, I see that you're going to share with your CEO, Janice. Thank you. And Lindsay, I see you like the baby steps. Conversations are a great start. There's nothing wrong with breaking this down in some very chewable parts, and to recognize that in order for you to truly move ideas into action, sometimes all you need is that to-do list to have some very concrete examples. Before I go to the beach, I'm going to turn it back over to Tara, and I'm going to leave you with the thought that one of the things that we heard early today was that may all beings be peaceful and safe from harm. I'm so proud of the fact that part of our efforts as leaders is to bring peace to the kind of chaos sometimes we feel we may be experiencing right now. But the ultimate goal is that we're protecting the patients and the families and the communities that we serve. Action planning, translating ideas into action is one way that you do this. Thank you very much for your commitment. Tara?
There,
Okay.
unmuted now. Thank you for
Yay.
the tip. I love the like universal messaging. But thank you for doing what I'm sure is some sort of record in filling out an action planning form with 90 people virtually. So that was amazing and exactly what we hoped would happen. Sue, it was very funny. I have to say, she's an amazing artist, but we had talked that we had an initial canvas that is one that's used throughout the design thinking field and is wonderful, but was a little bit more complex than what we wanted for this session, given our time constraints. And so she said, I'm gonna mess with this and make it perfect for what we need. And actually what she came up is exactly is what you saw. And initially we were gonna put it into this perfect, with the icons and all of those things. But in talking about it, we really wanted you to see how simple this can be and how low tech. What you saw was Sue facilitating, and I was using a PDF document and adding text to it as we went. So that's one of our little tips, but we want to go through some best practices that are important for design thinking in general, but very specifically when you're working in this virtual world. So we're going to start out with these kind of planning session tips. So these first tips are very much as you're in the beginning stages, maybe you're walking away from this conference and you're saying, that work that we talked about, increasing diversity, I do want to walk home and do this and have actionable items in the next week. So you want to pull a group of people together and maybe you want to mimic something like this. Well, one of the things that is a best practice is to plan it like you're actually running it in person. So don't think of this as more casual. I know that a lot of us may be in our jammies or yoga pants, or we have our dogs, like my snoring dog in the background. So it can feel like a more casual environment, but really it's so important to treat these sessions just as you would if you were all coming together for a formal learning event. I'm sure that I don't have to tell Lindsay and Libby and Laura and Stephen that that was required for this. And so, so that's one of the things you really want to think about. And part of that is really considering the duration of your sessions and breaks. So as many of you will be able to resonate with, living in this virtual world and jumping from Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting to WebEx meeting is exhausting. And it's more exhausting even than doing it in real life. So you need to make sure that you build those breaks in and that you're allowing people time to just step away from the computer and away from the bright lights and the microphones and that for adequate periods. So when you're building your agenda, make sure you include it. These sessions will take longer than they typically would if you were holding them in person in your organization. You've heard this over and over, and thankfully we're all getting more acquainted with Zoom, but factor in any learning curve on any new technology. We've heard great examples throughout the day in different sessions. I know our friends at Kaiser Permanente talked about how they ensure that they have opportunity for folks to test out and try the technology ahead of time. So whether that's a class or maybe it's a informal jump on, 30 minutes before we do this session, if you'd like some tips, many different ways to do it. And some people will need the more individualized support where you get one-on-one on the phone with them and talk it through, and others are comfortable in learning the technology in a group setting. I know even when I work with faculty who have done virtual sessions for years, and this is really nothing new, as we've been getting more creative about how to use virtual design and collaborative thinking, we actually have gotten on calls like this together and have said, okay, how do we do this? Like, let's figure out how we want to do this, and where's the annotate button? And so it really is a learning curve for all of us. So when we're talking about this, it's not just your patient family partners and community partners that sometimes need this support, it's also our staff that we're working with too. Plan the sessions in advance. You want to be strategic and intentional with these, just as you would if you were doing it in person. And always make sure you have a plan for follow-up. So, you know, if you're going through an action planning session, maybe you've created a half day where you can really come up with some concrete steps. What's the next plan? Are we going to talk again in a week and go through and see what updates have happened? Are we going to work independently and report back through an individual who's coordinating the efforts? But make sure that there's a plan in place for follow-up. The other thing, and this is pretty easy to do with a lot of the virtual platforms we have now, is to record the sessions for follow-up. You and I, all of us know how much I missed when I was taking notes on that action planning form, and there was so much amazing dialogue going on in the chat box. Well, being able to go back through a recording and capture all of that would be vital. And maybe some of it isn't what we would necessarily work on through this specific action plan, but in the future, maybe things you want a parking lot and look at later through other initiatives. Here are some basics that many of these we have all learned the hard way in various forms. But when you're starting one of these group working sessions, start by muting everyone. We know how disruptive it can be as people get settled in, and that using the video and gallery view, that way you can all see each other, especially when you're having discussions. It makes it feel more personal. I know that I'm much more engaged when I'm on video and I know it. Then, you know, it's really easy when you're not on video to say, oh, I could check this email or go take this call. So being really engaged in that way. I am going to throw this caveat out here right now with the video and gallery view. When we are partnering with patients and families and community members, sometimes that is not a place of comfort for them. And we do everything we can, of course, to build that trust and be able to engage in that authentic way with them, but also understand that, especially for folks who maybe have not always had the most positive experiences with people in authority or with the health system, it can be really intimidating to have someone looking into your house, because that's what's happening. So you can talk to them about using maybe a little green screen if you have one available to allow them to use, or maybe you talk about, well, you can hang up a sheet and have that as a background for a little privacy, but really meet them where they are in terms of their comfort and being able to engage. Make sure that those names are visible. Some folks, and I work a lot with the LGBTQ community, so a lot of times we'll include pronouns, she, her, hers, or he, his, down under our names too. So keeping in mind those things that help make conversations as easy as possible. I love mindfulness, just popped up there in one of the Abis, his name there. Push questions out so that everyone can see them. You know, you've seen our facilitators throughout the conference do that a lot, where they'll be put into the chat box while someone else is speaking, so that we can also get responses through chat box, but also give that space and time for folks to answer. I know it can be so uncomfortable, the silence. As a facilitator, I have been there where you're sitting, you're like, I'm just going to wait here for you. So sometimes it helps to, you know, count to 5 or do all those things that really open that space, because, you know, we have folks who will jump in there all the time and maybe we feel like we're needing to get others engaged, but sometimes we have a quiet group and it just takes that little nudge of uncomfortable encouragement to get them to share their thoughts. So waiting for those, use timers when you need to. Chat can be a powerful tool. Sometimes I've definitely been in design sessions where folks have said, we're not going to use the chat box, We're all going to, we don't want to have side conversations. We're going to have the conversation here as a larger group. So that's kind of one of those calls you need to make as you're planning your sessions and designing. Use polls and voting to keep it interactive. And then ask everyone, and I can't even see the end of, let's see. It was all covered up. But this is something I know we heard a lot from the Kaiser Permanente team as well, is that that making sure that everyone at least gets to speak their voice once. So it's a really great practice. Sometimes it's just when you do an introduction at the beginning or an icebreaker, that way you're encouraging everyone to speak. Sometimes it's when you're asking a discussion question and you want to hear from everybody. And I love the practice that they talked about. I think it was Michael who shared on that session was, if you're asking for feedback or ideas, if the idea that you had has already come up, you say ditto. But at least you shared your voice and your feedback and your input. So there are different ways to do it, but you have to be intentional in the planning and how it'll look like. So the other tips I want to talk about, and this, I think Eli in our opening panel this morning talked about this, about the difficulty of when you have some folks who are in person together and others who are remote, and how it can be really, it can feel alienating or disengaging for those folks who are remote when the facilitator is really more focused, their center of gravity is on the room that they're in. I know I have many colleagues who are on this session right now who have been those people who are the remote person, and there's a group of 15 and a table together, and you're like, hello, over here. So one best practice we really try to do is, especially with design sessions, if one person's remote, we're all remote. So we end up saying, okay, we're all just going to get on our computers and this is what we're going to use, because we're all going to be looking at the same thing that way, and we're all contributing in the same ways. There are absolutely ways to be engaging while you've got some folks remote and some who are present. You just have to be really mindful as a facilitator that you are asking folks for comments and questions and stopping and saying, Sue, would love to hear from you on this. So making sure that that is part of it. If you are mixing remote and in person, silence is okay. Share those resources by the chat box. I love it when the links come in and videos and things that are really related to things that are happening. Recruit a behind the scenes facilitator. So Sue and I did that. Obviously you could see if she had been trying to facilitate the conversation and taking those notes in that PDF, that probably would have been way messier than it was. So ensure that you've got at least one backup person. Folks who do this professionally all the time would even recommend two, so that you've got another person who can maybe monitor the chat box or take care of any technical issues that come up. Kind of like we've had Stephen's email go out, I don't know, 100 times over the last 2 days. If you have technical issues, contact Stephen. So having those backups are so vital. Include a warm-up energizer, just like you would. Again, everyone speak once. So this is important. Diverge alone, converge together. So we know there's some of us who are introverts, some of us who are extroverts, but we all have such valuable feedback to provide. And especially if you've got folks from diverse backgrounds who maybe it's not typical for them to sit on a Zoom call all day long and participate and share their voice and their thoughts. It's important to allow that space where people can, on their own, come up with ideas and responses to prompts or discussions, and then you all come back together, and that's where you build a consensus. And so really important to build that into whatever work you're doing. Time box. Basically that means keep your time, make sure you're staying on time and doing what you need to. And the tools you use matter. So I know we're just kind of in the wrap up of this session, but I wanted to share some things. You will have these slides. obviously, again, we just use simple PDF today. You could use PowerPoint in the same way, but there's some really cool tools out there that you also may want to check out. Maybe get your PFAC together and say, do we like one of these? Try them out together, and see if that may fit what you want to do as well. Breakout sessions with calls. I know so many of us are getting really acquainted with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, BlueJeans, or other places to look if you're wanting to have ability to do work in small groups as well as large groups. And then making sure the work continues. This can be as basic as you want to be, but there are also really good tools out there so that you can make sure you know who's doing what by when, and everyone on the team has access to it to monitor what's happening. So, with all that, Lindsay, I'm turning it over to you to take us on home.
Well, thank you so much, both Sue and Tara. Sue, for you just creatively walking us through that action plan, and Tara for all of those tips and tools and tricks. I've been doing this, I've been working remotely for almost 5 years, and I think I just took a whole handful of even more tips away with me as well. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it, and really encourage everyone to download the action plan. I put the link in the website earlier, but we will definitely be doing some follow-up. We'll share that, and we'll look forward to learning from all of you what you do with your action plans. What actions are you going to be taking in your organizations? If you could go to the next slide, please. So I think we actually kind of already did this. A lot of you shared your first steps to move your action or move your ideas into action. So thank you for sharing those. If you had other ideas as Tara walked through some of those tips, please share those in the chat box, even if they're the baby steps of having that first conversation or talking to your advisory council. Those small steps create large actions. So it's great to see all of you really committed to doing that. And I see Robert sharing with your Kaiser Advisory Council. Great stuff. Thanks all for keeping the chat very active. The slides are on the conference website. I'll post the link here in just a few minutes. We're actually going to have this session slides posted after today's session, but all of the slide decks for all of the sessions are on the conference website, and I will share that in the chat. We'll also be pulling together all of these really interactive chat conversations as an output of this conference, because there was so many incredible ideas shared, so many good questions, great conversation. So we'll be gathering all of those up as an output of our conference together. With that, again, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Tara, so much for walking us through this action plan. Really insightful and an incredible tool that we can all take with us and put all of these ideas into action. So thank you so much. And now I will pass it to founder and CEO of PFCC Partners, Libby Hoy, to wrap up this entire incredible conference. I am blown away, shocked. I am full of energy. It's really exciting. It was just like we were there in person. So Libby?
It was. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And Sue and Tara, what a fantastic session to wrap up with. I mean, I think that just, you know, we've always been about moving into action at the end of our conferences, and you kept that spirit alive and gave us a whole slew of new and fresh ideas for doing that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank first and foremost Cynosure and HSAG as our conference planning partners. Couldn't have done it without you. For those of you applying for CEUs, you will receive everyone will receive the conference evaluation, and we humbly ask for as much input as you can provide us about how we do this even better the next time around. As Lindsay mentioned, all of the slide decks are posted on the conference website. The recordings of each session will be posted there as well. And as Lindsay also mentioned, it was our intention and our desire to get the chat active so that we could produce an artifact afterwards to provide all of you to, again, continue to share these resources within your organizations. We had just under 500 people registered for this conference, so I anticipate a lot of downloading, a lot of sharing. Sharing, that's what it's been all about, right? And so we're going to continue that as well. We will be in touch with future opportunities to connect with one another. We'll be sharing that participant list for those of you who registered and asked to have that shared. New partners, we've got a lot of new folks we've not had conversations before with before. We would just want to acknowledge that we at PFCC Partners are here for you in your journey. Please feel free to contact us if we can support your efforts to promote person-family centered care and patient-family advisory programs. We had a lot of new patient-family advisors join us this year. Yay! For any of you who have not gotten active with the PFA network, I invite you to do that. Registration and access is free, and we're really just here to support you as partners to the health systems and organizations, research teams, measure developers, quality improvement organizations, policy organizations. We're here to support you in those partnership efforts, so please join us and contribute to the community of practice as well. Finally, I could not have pulled this off without this dynamic, tiny but mighty team of ours with Lindsay, Laura, and Stephen. Thank you so much for your commitment to pulling this into a virtual format. I will be talking about transparency, Sue. When I was mourning the loss of our in-person conference, boy, in April, I said, oh, just forget it. We're not going to do 10 years, and we're not going to do a conference exciting and informational. So thank you so much for your commitment, for the commitment of all of our participants. This is the start of a conversation, certainly. And the nice thing is we don't have to wait till next year to get together again. So more to come. We'll be in touch very shortly, and have a great afternoon. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Libby.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We need a virtual applause to take us out.